Hi, my name's J Patterson, and we're working through a series of videos on developing the Reversi application as a web application. We're using a bunch of technologies like Node.js, Bootstrap, and Socket.io, and we're going into a sequence of coding demonstrations here where we're going to build out the structure of the lobby, the place where players who are coming to this web application can meet other players, invite them to play the game, and have chat messages at the same time. So for this video, what I'd like to do is give you an overview of the flow and the code that we're going to be building out over the course of the next maybe 5 or 6 tutorial videos. So this is the Reversi lobby overview. All right, the key points here is that what the lobby is it's a website, a place, interactive, real-time website that's going to allow players to connect with each other so that they can play a game together. It's a two-player game, so that we have to have sort of a matchmaking process. This is going to require our web application to send a series of signals back and forth. Our client in the browser will have to send signals to the server located on the cloud or maybe on your local computer during development. And the server is going to send back to the client messages in response. We're going to start from the perspective of sending chat messages back and forth because that's the easiest thing to kind of understand. The client types something in, we send it to the server, and the sender sends it back to all the people who haven't received that message yet. That's kind of straightforward. But what we need to build on in this case is to have our client sending messages that the user doesn't see, but that help facilitate the interaction that's going on in the browser that the user does see and cares about. So let's walk through what that flow is going to look like. The basic flow after you go to index.html and you enter your name is you move to lobby.html. And the very first thing that lobby tries to do is it renders the web page, and then it starts running the JavaScript associated with the web page. That's going to pull the parameters off of the URL, for example, the username, and shortly it's going to be the room name as well. It's going to initiate a connection to the server so that we get real-time messages. It's going to describe and define a bunch of functions. And then the thing that it's going to do to kick off the whole interaction is it's going to send a join room message to the server. That's the first message that gets sent after the initial connection to the server gets made. This is an announcement by the client that a new player has entered the lobby and that the server should start tracking this player and sending this player messages. Whenever anyone joins this lobby room, the server is going to respond to everyone that's currently joined with a message in response that says, who are all the people that are in the lobby now? And that message that comes back has the name join room response in the code. And that's going to come back to everyone. So you'll send a join room response as a client, and you'll send a join room message as a client. You'll get a response back saying that you've joined, but you're also going to get responses back for every other person that's joined as well. When the client handles that message, when it handles the join room response message, what it's going to do is it's going to update the chat box saying that someone else has joined the chat, and it's also going to update the buttons that enable a player to be able to choose and to invite someone else. So there's kind of two things going on. There's the chat messages, and then there's the invite negotiation. So when the client does receive that join room response, they're going to make the message in chat announcing the arrival, and they're going to make those new buttons for playing. In my example, it looks like this. Now you're welcome to use your own aesthetic as you build this out, as long as it has the same functionality. And what we see here is we see that a user named Camilla has started playing this game, and this is her lobby. And she can see both through the chat message dialog and through the buttons on the left that two other people, Archie and Baltazar, have joined this particular lobby. If she types into the messages, she'll be communicating with both of them. And if she clicks on the invite button, she'll be inviting one or more of them to play at this two-player game. The other players, Archie and Baltazar, are going to see a similar kind of view, but they're not going to have their own name in the invite button. They're going to only have the other players' names. You can see that the place where the client responds and handles the join room response message, the place where it makes that message in the chat is where the arrow is pointing here. Adds this message saying that someone has joined. That was in response. That was handling the join room response, saying that Baltazar had joined. And it's also going to handle those responses by making new buttons. So these buttons aren't going to be there from the start. They're going to show up as people come and go. They're going to show up when people come, and they'll go away when people depart. Each one of these HTML DOM elements is going to be colored or labeled with a particular class that's going to have the name socket underscore and then a unique ID for each individual. Each individual has their own socket ID, which is kind of like a identifier number that's associated with their connection. And that's how we're going to keep track of who all the different people are, because the client and the server have the same socket ID for each person. Each one of the document object model components, each one of the divs or tags or labels or buttons, are going to have this class applied to it. Now, we're not using this class in order to structure the aesthetics of the website. The class is just there so that we can find those elements later if a player departs. We can remove them from from the user's view. So we use them to handle server events. Whenever one player clicks on the invite button, that button will turn color, change presentation, and say invited. On the corresponding player's lobby, the player who has been invited, their button is going to change to say play. And this is a two-part handshake where one person invites and then the other person accepts the invitation. Accepting the invitation would consist of clicking on the play button. So when one player clicks invite, the other player will see the corresponding button change to play, and the invite button will become invited. Now, if you want to rescind that invitation, the player who has invited on their side, in this case Camilla, can click on it and it will go back to the previous state, effectively uninviting a player that was previously invited. So now if the player on the right wants to invite the player on the left, they can do that by clicking on the invite button, but then the player on the left would have to click play in order to start the game. If someone has been invited and the second person wants to play the game, they'll click on play, and briefly the buttons will change to sort of an engaged presentation, saying that we're about to start the game. But very shortly, very quickly after that, the page is going to switch from being lobby.html and go to a new page called game.html, where we're actually going to run the game. As people come and go from this lobby, their corresponding entries will come and go as well. We'll see the invite buttons disappear if two people play a game and they're no longer in the lobby, or if they close their browser or navigate their browser to some other location. This chat will continue to persist. At least any messages that you've seen come in will persist, and then you'll start getting the new messages once you've joined the lobby. Meanwhile, in the code, as I mentioned, when the client handles a message, it's going to basically need to update the document object model. That's the primary thing that the client does. It receives messages from the server and it changes what it shows to the user. And it also takes events from the user, like clicking on buttons, and sends messages to the server based on what the user has sort of indicated through their user interaction. On the other hand, when the server handles a message, it's going to need to keep track of what's going on. So for example, keep track of who's in the lobby. And it's also going to need to communicate data back to all the players about any state change. New players have joined, new people have been invited, people have disappeared. All these things are going to be sent out as messages from the server. And because each client has a unique socket ID, they're going to be the same on both the client side and the server side, so that both of them will be able to make sure that we're talking about the same people using those IDs. Here's an example of the HTML that we're going to build. We're going to do this through code as people come and go. And so the presentation is in the upper right here. The players that are present, we have 3 rows. And you can see over on the left, we start with a column from our Bootstrap class. We have the players label there in H4. And then we have a div whose ID is players. And this is where we're going to insert programmatically all the players as they come in. And I just want to point out that if you look at where Baltazar is over on the left, you can see that all the divs associated with this player have the class socket underscore mx2lvd. That's a kind of a complicated identifier, but it's one that we're not manually entering. It's one that we're using code in order to enter. And you can see that we've identified, looks like 1, 2, 3 different div elements with that identifier, so that later on, if Baltazar leaves, we can remove those elements programmatically by removing those things that have that class. Doug has a different set of classes, and Enrico has a different set of classes as well, reflecting the fact that they each have their own unique identifier. All right, so that's the overview of where we're going. And in the next couple videos, we're going to build that out and do some housekeeping as well to try and implement this design. All right, thank you for your attention. Let's go.